Welcome to another episode of Washington in Focus. I'm your host, Tim Klauser, with TJ Martinell, the Center Square's Washington State investigative reporter, here to talk about the latest round of public records that TJ has gotten back from the state about the new income tax that's rolling through the courts and the state's potential legal strategy to combat it in the state Supreme Court. We know that they recently shot down a referendum. TJ has some of the behind the scenes insight into this. TJ, what records did you get in? How do you keep getting them?
Because I'm good, Tim. I'm real good. No, I got these records from the Secretary of State's office regarding the referendum on the millionaire's tax, and most of the records were redacted, but there was one draft document. It was the draft response to Let's Go Washington that the Attorney General's office was working on, and that they emailed to the Secretary of State's office. And what's interesting is it contained comments between members of the Attorney General's office. And in particular, there was this one comment by Carl Smith. He's the Deputy Solicitor General, and he's writing a message to Noah Purcell, the Solicitor General. And it's very fascinating. He's talking about a certain legal argument they were going to potentially use in their response. And he says that the state Supreme Court is as favorable. This is Noah. So Noah Purcell told Carl Smith that the state Supreme Court was as favorable a venue as we're likely to get. Carl Smith, who's a former clerk for the state Supreme Court, speculated that the state Supreme Court might allow a referendum to avoid having to deal with the question of whether income is property. And the thing that I find so interesting about this, and this goes back to the story I did initially, where Noah Purcell told Senator Jamie Peterson to put in an emergency clause to prevent a referendum, right? The implication of that is that if there was a referendum, voters would reject the millionaire's tax. What Carl Smith is implying, or one could argue he's implying, is that the state Supreme Court would allow a referendum so that voters would overturn this and they wouldn't have to deal with it. So it just really goes back to show how it's this unspoken open secret that if voters are given a chance to give their say on this tax, they would reject it.
Yeah, it's an interesting back and forth there. I mean, you have AGO staff saying, hey, look, if we want to overturn 100 years of state law saying that income is property, the state Supreme Court is as good as chance as we're going to get. And then at the same time, you have other people saying, hey, well, maybe they'll allow a voter referendum so they can avoid potentially weighing in on this issue in the future. I mean, ultimately, we know that they didn't do that, but it sets the stage. I mean, you have several governor appointed Supreme Court justices. Colleen Medley, I mean, she was recommended by Solicitor General Noah Purcell. She used to work underneath the governor. You have Theo Angeles he used to work with.
Yeah, and I did a story recently on how Colleen Medley met with Jamie Peterson in September. So the prime sponsor of the millionaire's tax.
Yeah, it just sets the stage. I mean, yeah, the justices will weigh in, try to remove themselves, but
yeah, I think that for people who are kind of like trying to figure out what's going on here, you have a former clerk for the state Supreme Court basically saying that the Supreme Court might issue a legal ruling not based on whether or not a referendum should or should be allowed, but so that they can avoid dealing with a dicey legal ruling, because it's not so much, it's not an issue of whether or not it's difficult for them to rule on whether income is property, because you have all these different, Senator Peterson has spoken out against Colleton, the 1933 decision. What doesn't seem to get addressed is the fact that the state Supreme Court has taken up this issue numerous times. There was a famous state Supreme Court decision in a couple decades after Colleton where they said it's no longer a question to this court whether income is property, and that was 50, 60 years ago. And then you had a decision in 2019 where once again, the courts ruled that income is property. As a result, the progressive income tax is unconstitutional. So the reason why is because there are groups that are so hell-bent on getting this millionaire's tax enacted and getting and then wanting a progressive income tax that, the issue is that our state Supreme Court justices are not, uh, two of them have been appointed, but they're elected positions. So, this is not like the US Supreme Court where they're appointed and they're there for as long as they basically want to be there, and they don't have to worry about the political ramifications of how they, make decisions. Whereas the state Supreme Court justices have to think about how this could affect them. So, you know, that's the context of Carl Smith saying, yeah, they might want to punt on this and allow voters to uh, weigh in. But it goes back to the point that Noah Purcell said to Jimmy Pearson, what Carl Smith is saying to Noah Purcell is that if voters are given a chance to weigh in, they're going to reject this tax. And there's no debate about that. And it's interesting how that's this it's this giant elephant in the room that the public does not want this millionaire's tax. So and these emails just kind of confirm it, but it really is calling into question whether or not the Supreme by saying this, it's calling into question the state Supreme Court's, um, for lack of a better word, their integrity. It's saying, oh, they might make a decision that's based on political convenience, not actually on case law, which is not what they did. Obviously, for the record, they rejected the referendum and they cited, longstanding, unanimous legal precedent. So, they obviously didn't take that approach, but it's interesting that a former clerk for them would speculate on that.
Yeah, a former clerk for the court, and then at the same time, I mean, the AGO, the state attorney general's office, it's supposed to be working on behalf of the people that, I
Right.
mean, if you look at the data for the people that showed up at these public testimony or these public hearings for the millionaire's tax, it was overwhelmingly against the tax. Yet you have these same people who are funding this agency, this attorney general's office, fighting against their will, and plotting behind the scenes on how to overturn nearly 100 years of legal precedent. um, TJ, what's next with the income tax? We know the voter referendum was rejected by the court. The court's bound to weigh in on this eventually, when the lawsuit in Clickitat County Court makes its way through appeals and then to the Supreme Court. Are we going to see this on a ballot? I know there's an initiative effort that's launching from Let's Go
Yeah.
Washington. Where are we at with this?
Well, they just launched the initiative process, so they're going to start collecting signatures. As far as this tax is concerned, I think I mean, I'm getting more records back, and I think also I'm I could potentially be getting more records back unredacted because the Attorney General's office weighed in on these records that are, according to the Secretary of State's office, are should not have been released to me. So we're going to see what's going on with that. I've got a lot of other public records requests that are pending. So we could be getting more and more information, but this is really the, the, this is really giving us a inside look at how this tax is being discussed and what's actually going on. And I'm sure for some people who are reading this or listening to this to us talk right now, this doesn't shock them. I think what they might be missing is the fact that y- there's what intuitively, and then there's what you can prove. And these are things that we can now prove and are no longer up for debate. Like the fact that Senator Peterson's millionaire's tax is not intended to put levy a tax on the wealthy and have the wealthy pay their fair share or whatever argument they want to make. The tax was introduced to overturn a legal rule, legal precedent that does not allow progressive income tax. That is the purpose of the bill. So that's now going to shape all debates around this tax and whether it should be overturned or not. Now we've got the Attorney General's office discussing, the fact that the Supreme Court is the most favorable venue that they're going to get, and also discussing whether or not the justices will make a ruling to avoid dealing with, you know, a 95, 93 years of legal precedent. So, that it just we could be getting more and more information on that. So, listeners, stay tuned. This this isn't, it ain't over till it's over, and it's not over.
Well, DJ, we appreciate you shedding light on what's happening behind the scenes. I think a lot of people might think in the back of their head, yeah, it's normal for this stuff to go on, but it's an entirely different thing to have the records to show that that is, in fact, actually happening. TJ, we appreciate your coverage. For anyone hoping to read that, you can catch it at thecentersquare.com. Otherwise, thank you for joining us for another episode of Washington in Focus.